The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age, called the Third Age by some, an age yet to come, an age long past, a wind whistled in the harbors of the island of Formatting, near the hills of Kintara. The wind was not the beginning. There are neither beginnings nor endings to the Wheel of Time. But it was a beginning. Welcome to Dragonsworn. I am Kevin, one of the streamers here on Let's Play Games West Virginia, and we're going to be playing an Ironsworn hack set in the Wheel of Time universe. If you're not familiar with Ironsworn, it is a series of now 2 books put out by Sean Tompkin. And one of the main features that are particularly interesting is it allows for solo play, which is something that might be useful for folks in quarantine, and is just kind of a fun thing altogether. I've been wanting to play Ironsworn for a few months now. I have the physical copies of the books as well as the online copies, the digital version, which we'll be looking at here. So on the screen that you're looking at, on the top right, you can see the PDF, which I'll kind of scroll here. And this is the rule set, so we'll be using those. On the left, I have the map of the world right now. We're here in Formatting, where we will begin our adventure. And we're going to be playing this Wheel of Time hack of Ironsworn. So I've been working for close to a month now on hacking Ironsworn for Wheel of Time. So within the context of the Ironsworn games, if you are playing somewhere which isn't in the canonical setting, which is this interesting sort of kind of Viking, light magic, grimdark setting, it's called a hack. So Wheel of Time has been one of my favorite settings since middle school, and coming up soon we have now, it's currently filming minus coronavirus, the Wheel of Time show that will be on Amazon. So since Wheel of Time is kind of getting some steam, I wanted to play a Wheel of Time RPG. Now, if you've been playing RPG for some time, then you might be familiar with this piece of ancient history. So this is the D20 Wheel of Time book. There were 2 of these that came out, the core rule book, which I have, and Prophecies of the Dragon, which was a short campaign setting, which I do not. So this was compatible with 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. It was printed in the early 2000s, and my gaming group played it a few times with some regularity. We enjoyed it, and I'm using this as a partial resource for Ironsworn. So one of the things that I've shoehorned into Ironsworn is to remove the ritualistic, or the ritual assets, which are kind of how you cast spells and magic in the game, and instead supplant that with the weave system from D20. So that doesn't necessarily work super well, so we'll kind of be playtesting that and figuring things out as we go, but that's kind of the core concept of that. So if you have not played this game and you're into 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, these are still available on eBay used, although the price is getting up there, especially for the Prophecies of the Dragon, which must have been a much smaller print or sold less. So with that, let's get started. So our character for our solar adventure is Cotoma Aldorosi, who lives here in Formatting. So if you're familiar with Wheel of Time, Formatting is a city-state, the former capital of Moredo, a country which is in decline and basically non-existent. So Formatting is the city-state that is remnant over it. What's interesting is it is one of the few places outside of, I suppose, Tarvalin, which is a matriarchy. So males in Formatting, their position is attached to the women in their lives. And what's particularly interesting about it is there is a massive terra Grial which prohibits channeling within the city. So there is no magic happening in Formatting. Cotoma Aldorosi is the youngest son in this minor noble house, the Aldorosi house in Formatting, who has the ability to channel. So one of the things that I produced while preparing for this game is a series of Wheel of Time assets. So there are specific assets for the game, which you can use to sort of choose character type, and there are some specific Wheel of Time ones. So the ones that we are starting off with are Male Channeler, which is one of my custom assets, Swordmaster, and Empowered. So he is the youngest scion of a noble house, he is trained to use a sword, and he is a burgeoning male channeler, a wilder. If you're familiar with Wheel of Time, you know that there is kind of all of the books take place in this kind of 2 to 3 year period. We're taking place kind of in the middle of Lords of Chaos, after the founding of the Black Tower, where men who can channel are not immediately gentled or otherwise harmed. There's a place for them to go, the Black Tower. Kotama, as a son of Farmatting and having the ability to channel, isn't aware of it growing up. So there tends to be an incident that causes new channelers to grab their power. It often presents them with a block later on that they have to work through, and they have a limited set of abilities that they can use. So since we're using the D20 Wheel of Time Weaves list and their structure, I'm starting him out with access to 2 0th level weaves and 1 1st level weave. However, he's not going to actually be able to use those at the beginning, except for one, which is Sense Shadow Spawn, and it's only going to be available to him in moments of great fear. So he's going to begin play with a block having to do with fear. So formatting is not overly conducive to channelers. Obviously, it's impossible unless you bring little bits of the 1 power in a well with you to channel within the city. So it's very likely that channelers in the city never know they have access to reach the 1 power. So in Kotama's background, he had an incident where he was hunting in the hills of Kintara outside of Formatting. You can see those here on our map are a little bit outside the city, where one of his friends, Hirscham the Hunter, lives, and they were suddenly attacked by several Trollocs who had come from a waygate nearby, and they fled back to the city as soon as they could. So there wasn't a fight per se. To folks in the wilderness during all of the happenings that's common with the dragon being reborn are not going to stand and fight with a group of Trollocs. They probably didn't even understand what they saw, but immediately fled back to the city. So in this situation, the first moment where Kotama was able to cast a weave was done instinctively and in fear, and it's the Sense Shadow Spawn. So if Kotama is in a situation of heightened fear, he's going to be able to have access to that. His primary goal is going to be to reach the Black Tower, which is a few leagues south of Caemlyn, just in the north here in Andor. So it's not a huge distance as far, but it's a bit travel. It's further than he's ever gone. So as the youngest scion, he doesn't really have a place in his house. All of his elder siblings, his older sisters, have clear roles to take over the family business. His older brothers have positions working with those sisters, and there's a clear family plan. There's an age gap between him and his next oldest sibling. Kotama maybe wasn't as planned in the house as it unfurled, and so he really doesn't have a whole lot to do. He's always been extra. He's always been in the way. So Kotama, he's wanting to leave Formatting, but he doesn't have the permission of his house. So the first part of Ironsworn is a vow, and so we're making use of that system, and that's kind of what moves along the plot. And Kotama's first vow is to leave Formatting, to head to the Black Tower, to join, to sign up, to rise in the ranks, and to prove to his family, himself, that there's a place for him, that he has the ability to do something great. Maybe he will fight alongside of the Dragon Reborn at the last battle. But he's decided that this thing which would make him an outcast, if it were widely known, is going to be his avenue to greatness. So that's the plot kind of for Kotama, and that is our largest vow to begin the game. Roll20 has a very well built out Ironsworn character sheet. So our first vow is going to be to join the Black Tower, rise in the ranks, and fight alongside the Dragon Reborn. This is an extreme challenge. So if you're not familiar with how progress works in Ironsworn, here we go. The rank of a vow, you mark off different amounts of progress. So that's, progress here. So if this were a troublesome vow, our first initial event is going to be a little more difficult than that, then you would mark off 3 complete checks with each bit of progress. So what that means is you're going to have basically 4 events to handle a troublesome vow. As that goes up in difficulty, you add fewer and fewer checks. So on an extreme check, you're only going to mark 2 ticks per solution. So you're going to have many, many more challenges and adventure kind of points than you will if you have something which is merely troublesome or dangerous. So his overarching vow is to join the Black Tower, rise in the ranks, and fight alongside the Dragonborn. That is a huge goal, and it's one which will take quite some time to do. His inciting incident, which is the second part you do to begin a game, is to escape the city of Formatting and find his friend Hersham, who will hopefully put him up for a few days while he figures out what exactly he's going to do. So that's where we're going to begin the adventure today, is finding Hersham and seeing what we can do there. This is a supplement that I'll be using throughout the game. This is the Dragonsworn supplement that I'm working on and building now. It will eventually be available online probably, but as of right now, it's just here for our play. So it contains which assets to use, additional assets which don't exist in the game, some Randland specific oracles. So some of the oracles, since they're setting specific, don't really work for us. So if we need locations, we need them in Randland, like the Isle Waste or Ilion or Kandor or anywhere else. If we need specific cities, we have those. If we need to have kind of random encounters, we have Shadow Spawn. And then we also have names for folks if we have to run into some NPCs. So eventually I'll build these out to rollable tables, but as of right now, they're just living here. So the opening scene. So I'm envisioning an instance where Kotama went to an aunt of his, and he said to her, let's produce a name for her using our tables real quick. Danua. So Kotama goes to his aunt Danua, and he begins to tell her that he's thinking of leaving Formatting. He's savvy enough to know that he needs to play his cards correctly. So the incident with Hersham in the woods is a few weeks old, and he's ventured outside of the city, beyond the reach of the Terran Grial, which prohibits channeling, and try as he might, he hasn't been able to recreate the experience or the feeling of seizing Saidin. These are words and phrases he doesn't even know yet. He just knows that something welled up in him from a place of fear, and he could immediately get a sense that around him, that the Dark One's presence was clearly there, and that he could feel Shadow Spawn nearby. The way the weave is described here in the Wheel of Time series is that it doesn't indicate type, number, direction, or location of Shadow Spawn, just their mere presence. So that's what we're using. So here it's this Sense Shadow Spawn weave, a level 0 weave. So he hasn't been able to recreate this experience. Hersham seemed to know that something was up, though. He realized that there was something not quite right, and they exchanged a look in it when Kotama turned to him and said, there's something in the woods, as they hurried back. So Kotama needs to leave the city, and he goes to his aunt, a trusted friend and family member, and says, I need to go. I need to spend some time out. And Danua's stern. She knows that her older sister, Kotama's mother, would not approve of him leaving the city. And she counsels him and says, no, you really should stay. You should learn your place here. You should find your place here. There's no good reason to go. And he says, no, I really have to go. And she says, what could be so important? What could be holding you back? And at this point, he decides to be honest with her. And he says, I went out into the woods and something happened there. I felt something. And she stops him immediately. She says, don't say something which could result in an awful consequence for you in your house. Kotama's taken back. His aunt has always been supportive, and this kind of shocks him. And she leans in and says, maybe it would be best for you to leave, but not until the morning. It's too late this evening. You won't. You could get lost heading out, and you should wait until the morning. They kind of part and separate, and Kotama's distressed. He doesn't really understand what happened. Danua, however, makes her way immediately to her older sister and kind of gives her the heads up, tells her what's up. Kotama heads back to his room, and he's packing, preparing for the next day's events anyway, and out from a window, he can hear that there's some kerfluffle happening outside, and he sees men begin to move along the walls, and he can hear gates and doors slamming from the keep of the house, the great house. And he realizes the jig is up. Danua has turned him in, and he must make his way without any help or assistance as soon as he can. So he grabs what he can, just the few limited amount of supplies that he had that he prepared for the journey, and he has to sneak out of the house. So one of the things I think that we're going to do to start off is we're going to use the secure an advantage roll. So he's going to try to, let's see, I think we're going to call this deception. He's going to try to use stealth, and he's going to try to make his way out of the house without being seen. So he's going to do that with some of the equipment that he has, and preparing himself for having played hide and seek for many years in the house, as children do where they live, and he's going to attempt to secure an advantage. Since we're using this for stealth, it's going to be plus shadow. And we're going to roll. I don't think there's any additional modifiers here that change anything, so let's see what that looks like. If you're not familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse games, you have two dice. You have challenge dice, and you have your ability dice. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to get a d6 to be higher than one or both of the other dice, which did not happen for us. So this was a miss. So had we gotten a strong hit, meaning that our d6 was higher than both of the d10s, we would gain the advantage when we would choose one. On a weak hit, we have the short-lived advantage and we take one momentum. On a miss, you fail or your assumptions betray you and pay the price. So the goal here is to have your d6, which is your action die, to be higher than one or both of your challenge dice, which is not the case here. We missed. So we don't get either of the strong or weak hit. On a miss, you fail or your assumptions betray you. Pay the price. So the situation as it is now, Kotima's aunt betrays his confidence to her older sister, and the house begins to fortify to prevent his escape. He grabs his meager equipment and prepares to make flight. So we made the secure an advantage roll using shadow, and we missed. So now we have to pay the price. So we have to rate now two possible outcomes. One is likely, and the other one is more likely. And then we're going to ask the Oracle for a yes/no question. So he's trying to sneak out. I think two things are likely to can cause that to not happen. One is that he would be caught trying to escape. And I think that's probably the most likely. And the second one, maybe the second one he is actually able to escape, but he is injured in the process. And that might actually, that's more in line with a weak hit. So I don't think that is in line with a true miss. Maybe the least likely one is he doesn't even get to try to make the escape, that he's caught in his room and doesn't even actually get to make flight. So he's basically so behind the curve here that he doesn't even make it out. So we envision two negative outcomes. One is likely, and we ask the Oracle using the yes/no table. On a yes, we make that outcome happen. Otherwise, the other. All right. So if it's 26 or greater, it is likely. If it's under 26, it didn't happen. Our roll was yes. Okay. So in this case, he is caught trying to escape. He's not flustered in the room. Let's see what that looks like by rolling on this table. So this is an 18. Your action has an unintended effect. Let's find a new NPC here. So let's see who we're working with. So we have Nekun, who is a conceited thief. Trying to collect a debt. So, Nekun the Thief. So if we roll a 1, we'll have someone who's male. If we roll a 2, someone who's female. If we roll a 3, we'll have someone who's non-binary. So Nekun is a woman. So as Kotama is grabbing his gear, he begins to make his way through the hallways. Obviously, he can't have a torch. He needs to move silently and without being any kind of visual spillover. So he's moving in the dark, heading out, and he realizes his best chance is probably to make it along the castle wall and drop off to a nearby hill. But before he can even get outside, he suddenly runs into Nekun. And Nekun is someone who's hired by the house to do general tasks which are too unpleasant for the nobility to do themselves. Every house has folks like this attached to them. If you have a shipment that needs to get delayed, or you have a rival who maybe needs a good scare put into them while they're traveling through the streets, or some other kind of thing, people of power have other people to do work for them, and Nekun is one such as this. Nekun can secure items and favor, and is a thief, and is good at what she does. And Nekun stops and says, "Hey, Kotama, where do you think you're going at this time of night?" And she smiles because she knows something must be up, and clearly the entire castle is roused to action, and she knows that something is happening. He looks at her and he goes, "Oh, just going for a walk, not doing anything too difficult. Nothing much. Let's see if he can deceive her." So again, looks like we're hitting up towards Shadow. Let's look at our character sheet real quick and just kind of like see what we're looking at, because we actually haven't talked about that a whole lot. So when you're building your Ironsworn character, you have to assign values to Edge, Heart, Iron, Shadow, and Wits. I actually assigned the medium value to Shadow, so I'm better at that than other things. Heart is high, Edge and Iron are low, and Wits is at the highest level. So Kotama, has his wits about him, thinks he can do well, kind of figure his way out of many situations, apparently often through trickery and perseverance. He's not the stand-up, in your face, and have the fight kind of guy. So let's then make that move. So this is compel, and he's going to try to lie. Nothing much is up. And a complication. Man, this is just not apparently our day for that. So Kotama just got caught trying to lie by someone who is much better at it than he is. So what are the possible outcomes? Nekun could become angry. And I think that's the more likely of the two. Or she could find it humorous, but still going to make it difficult. So let's see where we're at. She's angry. All right. She's pissed. So Nekun leans in and she says, I know you're lying. Why would you even try to lie to me? You can't even sneak out of your room at night without some kerfluffle, and you think you're going to pull one over on me? I came here to do you a favor. I came here to help you out. You know what? You owe me everything that you've borrowed right now. And Kotoma's flustered. He only has the money that he was able to get up quick, which is some, but it's probably not substantial. He's a noble, so it's more than you might expect. And he immediately starts leafing through, pulling out his purse and seeing how much is present. And he looks up and he says, I need this to leave, and I can't give it to you now. She says, well, that's exactly what you're going to do. And she reaches out and snatches all of Kotoma's money and takes it from him. She goes, and because you lied to me, I'm going to march you straight to the lady, and we'll see what she has to do for you. She spins him around, grabs a wrist, and hikes it up into the center of his back, almost dislocating his shoulder, and begins stomping him down the hallway. This is clearly not how Kotoma planned to make his escape. So one of the things that we haven't discussed as a result of failing 2 rolls is momentum. So in Ironsworn, momentum is one of the more important stats. Here on the left of the character sheet, you can see it goes from -6 through 0 all the way to +10. So your maximum is starts out at +10, and it's determined by whether or not you're currently carrying any debilitating conditions called debilities. These reduce your max. So here you see max is 10 and reset is 2. If we apply the wounded condition, the max comes down, as does the reset, shaken, unprepared, etc. The reset can never go below 0, but the max can come down quite a ways. The reset starts at +2. So what happens here is, as the story goes, if you're doing well as a result of certain moves, if you're trying to secure an advantage, for instance, your momentum can increase. As you do that, this basically gives you an indication that you're doing well and that the story is not working against you. One of the things you can do is you can burn your momentum back to your reset value to secure some kind of benefit for a roll. You can reduce a die if your current is above that amount. So for instance, let's say we roll a test, and that test, my action die, the d6, is 4, and I roll a 6 and an 8. Well, if I had a momentum of 7 and I burnt it, I could get rid of the 6, but not the 8, giving me a minor success. If I still had 7 and I'd rolled, for instance, a 5 and a 6 on the d10s, and I had a 4 as an action die, when I burnt it, I would pass both and I would have a strong hit. Whenever you burn, it comes down to your reset value, which gets affected by your abilities as well. So this is one of the more important stats for the game. It kind of tells you how you're doing, and it can be affected by moves. So for instance, a move might say suffer -2 momentum. That'd be a pretty major setback. It can also, however, have narrative effects. So for instance, we just failed 2 rolls in a row. One kind of led into the other. The one was clearly worse than the second was clearly worse than the first. So I need to track that now. So in our first roll, I'm going to go ahead and reduce that by 1 for narrative reasons. Nothing in Pay the Price told us that we had to do that. but for narrative reasons, because we had to pay the price, it makes sense. However, being grabbed by the arm and carried before the lady is a pretty serious setback, which brings, I think, us all the way to -1. So taking away 1 momentum for the first roll and 2 for the second. My goal was to escape the castle unknowingly to the other people in it, and now I'm being dragged in front of the matriarch. That sounds like a pretty serious setback to me. So obviously I can't burn to get back to 0 or -2. So what I need to do is, through moves and other plays, I need to get that number back into the positive, which will happen presumably as soon as we start actually succeeding in rolls. So that's where we're at thus far. We've adjusted our momentum, and we're ready to continue play. So here I adjusted our session 1 record to say that we had -1 momentum for being caught and -2 for being dragged before the lady. So the Lady DeRossi is the matriarch of her house, and she looks like many of the women in the city do. High-necked dresses, detailed embroidery, but she has kind of a dark demeanor about her. So where we're typically used to seeing embroidered flowers and birds, hers are all in shades of dark gray and black, and the embroidery is present, but there is a dark hint to it. So as Kotama gets dragged by Nekun in front of her, she's already sent others looking for him, so she's prepared for this reception. She sits at the end of not really a throne room, but a council chamber, slightly elevated on a dais, large chair, intense looking architecture, as Nekun drags Kotama into the room and pushes him before him. Nekun curtsies, bows, and says, "I've brought to you the son who was attempting to flee. Lady, this is simply an expression of my loyalty and love for you. Please accept this humble gift." The lady is not enthused. She doesn't even glance at Kotama. She looks to Nekun and says, as always, a faithful servant. She flags over someone who's standing on the outside of the room, the bursar, and kind of indicates that they should have a conversation, that Nekun will be compensated for this service. It's not just out of love and loyalty. Coin buys a certain amount of that. Lady DeRossi sits back in her chair and stares at Kotama. Kotama's been in a similar situation before. It's not that pleasant, so he knows to keep his eyes averted, staring at the floor, waiting. Anything he says now is not going to help him out in the slightest. And so he waits. An uncomfortable and long silence. Lady DeRossi lays a finger on her chin and says, Kotama, I don't know what we'll do with you. I'm told you were fleeing the city, fleeing my house. Surely that can't be the case. Kotama risks a glance up at her in her chair. Her face is stern but not unkindly. He says quietly, I was indeed trying to leave. Not that I was running away, but that I had something which called me which was important. He can kind of see his aunt stiffen at the edge of the room. Lady DeRossi looks over at her sister, back to her son. If you wanted to go, you could have just asked. Well, that catches him by surprise. He looks up. As it happens, I have an errand that I need to be run. I'm not sure where it was you thought you were going, but if you would go somewhere for me, maybe we could loosen the apron strings, as it were, once you're back. Kotama starts to think, and that's not quite what he wanted, but it's certainly better than whatever punishment he thought was in store. And so he thinks to himself, well, I mean, she can't really send him someplace awful. He did eventually want to hook up with his friend the hunter, but he'll have to do what he has to do. And so he raises his head and he says, I will go on an errand for you, lady. Where would you have me go? Which I think is an excellent question. So let's find out an answer for that. So I'm going to roll on the Randland Cities rollable table that I produced. I have a general thought for kind of where, what part of the world I want this to be in. So if we get anything that's too far out, then we probably will roll again. So I'm definitely looking for something in this sector of the world, because it needs to be a short errand, something that the lady would actually send her son on. So let's see where we go. That's a little bit further away than I was hoping for. Kindlin will do. She says, I have an errand that needs to be run. We have a shipment that we've sent to Kindlin 3 times now, and none of them have made it. We suspect they're being diverted somewhere probably south of the city. We're not sure how far. But I'll be sending a 4th shipment, but this time with a sizable contingent of men-at-arms to ensure its delivery. But it's not only that. We're going to send them by a circuitous route. I would not have you take the road to Kindlin, north from the city. Instead, we will have you cross one of the southern bridges, where you will make your way east to the River Arun. A boat will await you there. It will be dragged upstream to Arungil, where you will deboard and make your way along Kindlin's east road into the city, thereby to meet my man who will be there to accept the cart. It shouldn't be a terribly long journey, and it should be uneventful, since whatever brigands are harassing on the road probably shouldn't expect you from this angle. I have to send you with a certain number of men of arms, and as well as some additional folks, just to make sure that now my son is safe. Does that seem to your liking? Kotama kind of looks around a little confused. It's precisely to his liking. He's going to have to miss his friend in the hills of Kintara, but maybe he can pass a message somehow to him. But, well, this is exactly what he was looking for, to leave the city. So he says, yes, mother, I will do that for you. I will take your shipment east and then north to Kindlin. She says, excellent. It will take me a few days to get things prepared, so you have some time in the city. Do not leave the city beforehand. If you need anything, see the bursar. He will give you what you need. I will also forward you your allowance a month. Make sure you have coin to spend on your travels. You must go under some cover of secrecy. Do not flaunt your station. Travel as mere merchants. Once you are there and you meet the man, also give him this. And she signals for someone next to her to exchange a letter. Do not open it. Exchange it and return as soon as you may. Kodama receives the letter from the manservant, bows his head and says, thank you, mother. I don't know what to say. Her attention, however, has already moved to someone by her side, and he realizes that he is dismissed. So at this point, we have a new task. I think we've made actually some progress here. But we're going to swear a new iron vow. And this is supposed to be, I think, merely a troublesome vow, not terribly difficult. So to swear an iron vow, you roll plus heart. So we're going to do that here in this window. If it is with a community with whom you share a bond, add +1. We do have a bond with the lady. let's see how we're doing. A weak hit. Alright, so I had negative momentum, so the action die gets cancelled for that. However, we still get a weak hit due to the score. So on a weak hit, you are determined, but begin your quest with more questions than answers. You take +1 momentum and envision what you do to find the path forward. So we will add a momentum to our track. And that actually, I think, puts us in a pretty decent position. So one of the first things that Kodama is going to need to do is he's going to need to prepare to go. So I think we're going to make another move, and we're going to gather information. So in this case, it's important that Kotama finds out who he's traveling with. He can make preparations, he has some time, and I think the gather information move will kind of put us where we need to be. So for gather information, we're going to search an area, ask questions, conduct an investigation, or follow a track. You roll plus wits, and again, we're within a community that we share a bond, so we're going to add +1. And a miss. On a miss, your investigation unearths a dire threat or reveals an unwelcome truth that undermines your quest. Pay the price. So, with a miss, something unfortunate happens. We learn something that delays us slightly. So I have rolled on the pay the price table, rolled a 57, which means that it causes a delay or puts you at a disadvantage. So I want to take that plus the idea that he's learned something unfortunate. And the thing that I've come up with is that in doing some investigation, in hanging around and trying to ask questions, specifically about the shipments that went out and never made it, he starts to hear a rumor, and he moves through the lower harbors and through some of the strangers' markets where foreigners are permitted to come and do commerce. And he hears rumors about the lady that he hadn't heard from inside the keep. And he learns that she may have made an alliance with someone outside of the city, and that the lost shipments are in fact bribes, money to further some goal of hers. She's ambitious enough that it makes sense that it might be something that she would do. But now he's being sent on one of those missions. Maybe that isn't perfectly as safe as she insinuated that it might be. That puts him in a tough spot. He does get to take a few folks with him. He's not supposed to leave the city without permission, but he's going to try anyway. So let's see what we can do from here. So I think what we need to do here is we need to secure an advantage. So let's secure an advantage. We're going to use Shadow because he's going to defy his mother. He's going to attempt to sneak out without her knowledge, even though she has forbidden him from leaving the city. There's no modifier here, so we're just leaving it up to fate again. And we have a weak hit. So on a weak hit, we secure an advantage, but it's short-lived, so we take 1 momentum. I'm not actually going to subtract any momentum for the miss from before, since although that was a miss, it's not a miss in the technical sense. I don't think it really makes sense for the story. That it didn't really hinder him, it actually moved him forward. So rather than take one away, I'm just not going to take one at all, which does put him at least now in the positive position. So Kodama is going to make his way out of the city. He's going to very, very carefully extricate himself, pass out through one of the gates that foreigners typically use, and make his ways into the hills of Kintara, finally on his way looking for his friend. So he's slightly outside the city, moving to the hills of Kintara. I don't think the journey is as easy as it might be, but we can adjust some of that with rolls. So this is a short journey. I don't think it actually merits a whole undertake a journey roll. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to take the portion of this whereby for each stage, we'll treat this as like a single segment journey, you roll plus wits. So we're just going to make that plus wits roll rather than undertake the whole journey. We do have a modifier since we're starting off from a place where we share a bond. Wow, we actually did well at that point. So that's a strong hit. So we have opportunity here, strong hit. Our action score was 10. Both of our challenge dice came up 6s. So yeah, finally. So a strong hit results in him making his way finally to Hirschem the Hunter's abode. We're going to take 1 momentum, plus 1 momentum, and suffer -1 supply based on the strong hit that we move at speed, make progress, take momentum, but suffer supply. We will take momentum back to our reset and suffer a -8 supply. So a little bit about Hirschem. Hirschem is one of the characters that Kodama has a bond with and has for quite some time. So I wanted to talk a little bit about who Hirschem was. Hirschem lives in the hills of Kintara near Farmatting. He's a man who makes his living hunting, trapping, and basically exchanging those produces in the city. He's taken a keen interest in Kodama since he was a boy. He lives outside the city, only coming in to sell fur, meat, and other products from the wild. He was born in Farmatting, left as a young man. There are many rumors as to why. Maybe he lay with the wrong person, or stole from a great house, or maybe something far worse. Despite that, both being somewhat outcast, Kodama has a deep love for the wild man of Kintara, and they have a long friendship since Kodama was a young boy. So that's Hirschem the Hunter, who we're dealing with at the moment. So Kodama makes his way there, and finally finds his friend. He arrives late into the evening. It's after dark, and he tries to make a little bit of noise so he doesn't surprise his friend. And as he makes his way up, Kodama has cut out a. It began as sort of a 3-sided shelter and slowly grew, and so it's kind of reminiscent of a log cabin. It's backfilled with earth to keep it warm, and it's this sort of earth-sheltered, half-underground cabin where the wild man of Kintara lives. Although he's standing at his door, enjoying a smoke of a pipe, as Kodama makes his way up the hill, none too quietly. Hirschem looks a little suspicious. It's a strange time for Kodama coming, but he gives him a shout. Hey, Kodama, boy. Well met. Why are you here this late in the day? Kodama, who's a little out of breath, hoofs it up the hill. He raises his hand, a little out of breath, and he says, Hirschem, friend, I need a bit of advice. I think I'm in it, well and truly, in the thick. Oh, come inside, boy, come inside. This is not a conversation for the outside. Of course, there's no one around for miles, but he looks around suspiciously and brings Kodama inside. He pulls up 2 chairs next to the fire, which is, burning at a nice pace. The room is warm. Kotama pulls off of his cloak and starts to loosen boots and sit down and says, Hersham, I don't know what to do. I'm being sent on a mission. The lady is sending me out from Camelin, to Camelin. Of course, I wanted to leave Farmatting, as I'm sure I've told you before, but not like this. I think that something doesn't feel right. And Hersham looks at him and says, so she's sending you to Camelin? He says, yes, but by a circuitous route, and she's giving me a letter to deliver and giving me a strict injunction not to open it. And I don't know what to do. Hersham kind of leans back and he says, I cannot counsel you to defy the Iron Lady of Derosi. I would be incredibly curious as to what was in the letter, however. Kotama nods. Yeah, me too. But I think you're right. I don't think I should open it. But I have a bad feeling about it, and I'm not sure what to do. Hersham says, boy, were I a few years younger, I would surely go with you. I can't, but what I can do is I could give you a contact of mine, someone that I occasionally make use of in the city who might be able to go with you. Would that help? And Kotama's eyes open wide and he says, yeah, if it's someone you trust, I would surely have a trusted friend with me on a journey such as this, rather than without. He says, okay. So we will briefly hit pause, and we will roll ourselves up an NPC. So we have a hard-hearted artisan who is seeking to restore a relationship. I'm not feeling artisan. Let's see what else we come up with. Ooh, bandit. That's well and truly what we need. So again, 1 is male, 2 is female, 3 is non-binary. A female bandit, so we will pull up female sounding first names. Cornitha. So let's see who we have here. All right, and one other thing. For a we're going to take some executive authority and decide that that's actually formidable. I think having an extreme NPC is a little bit much for right now. So now we have Cornitha, a friend of Hersham, a hard-hearted bandit seeking to repair a relationship. I think that relationship she's trying to repair is actually with Hersham, that she is in his debt and Hersham knows it. And she believes maybe once we meet her that she can pay off this debt by helping young Kotama on Hersham's behalf. So Hersham says, I have someone who I think would be excellent for the journey. I have a friend might not be the right word. I have an acquaintance named Cornitha. She's definitely the kind of person you want to have in your corner when things get tough. And it happens to be that she owes me a favor, so it's a rather large favor. But if we can go into the harbor or markets tomorrow. I should be able to find her, and I'm pretty sure I could convince her that your cause is a worthy one. Considering everything, I think we should head back to the city tonight. I don't think you could afford to be caught missing come morning. Kota Mananza. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, you're right. We definitely need to be back tonight. Um, uh, anything you need? Here, let's gather it up and let's go. So Kotama and his friend Hersham are going to make their way back to Farmatting. We're going to use the same metric that we used before, which was a wits roll. And again, we have a bond with Hersham where we're starting from. So we're going to go ahead and add a +1 to that. Ooh. So we rolled a 1 on our action die and then a 6 and a 10. So that is a straight up miss. I think the most obvious thing that would happen is they are waylaid. So let's see by what. That doesn't have the right feel. Let's try that again. Nope. Probably should have just picked from this list. Yep, that'll do it. So as the two men make their way through the hills into the plains towards the lake in which Farmatting lies, a sense of stark fear begins to creep up in Kotama's chest, and they hear sounds behind them. It's a breathy, hustling, slavering, intense sound. The two men pick up speed. The sounds are getting louder and faster, and the fear is creeping up Kotama's throat, grabbing him so he can barely breathe or speak. At this point, he feels an instinctive release. So at this point, for narrative purposes, we're going to have this occur, but I want to kind of discuss the weave system in a little bit more in depth than we did previously. So I mentioned that we are using the D20 Wheel of Time book, kind of shoehorned into Ironhorn. So D20 has character levels 1 through 20, caster levels, just like Dungeons and Dragons, 1 to 9. So what I've done is I've condensed these into tiers. So we have tiers of weaves 1 through 5. I went through and I recategorized all of the weaves that exist in the book, applied a metric for converting levels to tiers, which you can see here. So Wheel of Time RPG levels come over here to Dragonsworn tiers. As characters go up, they can increase in tiers. So for instance, Kotama is a wilder, so he has this asset male channeler. And at the bottom here, we keep track of those tiers. So he is starting out, for narrative purposes, I want him to actually be kind of strong in the power. So rather than starting out at 0 or having him start at 1. So at tier 1, you can see back here on my chart, you would have 2 0th level weaves and 1 first level weave. Oh, that's actually slightly incorrect. That 2 shouldn't be there, so I'll have to adjust that. So I've chosen those weaves. I'm keeping those track here. These are the weaves known. I chose Sense Shadow Spawn, Earth Delving, and Blade of Fire. However, I indicated that Earth Delving and Blade of Fire he actually doesn't have access to. So I want his casting in the beginning before he gets any formal training to be this instinctual thing built of fear, which is in fact his channeling block. So the other stuff, even though mechanically he has access to it, narratively it doesn't quite make sense. So from there, I'm keeping track of weaves per day, and so this is very much like Dungeons and Dragons, where you have spell slots or weaves per day as existed in the D20 book, and this is where I'm keeping track of that. This chart down here on the far right side of the screen is the channeler weave progression for wilders. So as they go up in tiers, they get increasing numbers of weaves per day. And they also have affinities. So the benefit to being a wilder over being a trained initiator soldier in one of the towers is that you start play with 2 affinities in the 1 power. So the 1 power is broken into 5 parts: earth, air, fire, water, spirit. And the wilder begins play with 2. So if you are casting a weave that has an affinity which you also have, you get a +1 for it. If the weave has an affinity that you don't have, you have to take a -1. So some are simple. They require, say, only spirit. And if you had spirit, you would take +1. If you don't have it, you would have -1. Some of the very powerful weaves require all 5 powers. If you only had 3 affinities, which wouldn't actually be possible here unless you were over-channeling, then you would end up taking a -2 on that roll. So that's kind of how I've chosen to balance affinities, weaves, and all of those. So the benefit to being a wilder is you get 2 affinities. However, if you were a trained initiate in one of the towers here, you are going to end up with more spells per day at every single level, at every single tier, for each tier of spells. But you only start off with 1 affinity, and your max use of a level of tier 5 is going to be higher. So if you want to kind of play the long game for getting the most magical power out of your character, you would want to play an initiate or a soldier of one of the towers. If you are interested in early game progress or narrative stuff, maybe the wilder is where you would be. So I've connected each of the Wheel of Time affinities here to one of the Dragonsworn stats that we might need for rolling. So let's bring Kotama back up. So the first thing you have to do as a channeler is seize the power or open yourself up to the power. So when you attempt to channel and you have at least +2 momentum, you choose one. You can add +2. On a hit, you can take or give a minor effect. On a miss, you endure harm or stress as narratively appropriate. So, for instance, if you were doing something with fire or earth, you might choose to endure harm. If you were doing something with air or water, you might endure stress, and that would be chosen by the player. So, for interest's sake, we are going to roll heart. We have a weak hit there. So the issue with being a wilder is you have a block, and so you treat a weak hit as if it were a miss for purposes of seizing the 1 power. So in this case, we're going to have it happen because narratively it's appropriate, but if we'd rolled for it here, Kotama would have reached out for the source and found nothing. The block is in the way. As soon as a wilder reaches tier 2, they can narratively work through to get rid of the block, but while it exists, you can only seize the Saidin on a strong hit only. So that's kind of how weaves are going to work for our game here. This is the weave list, so I have pulled all 65 of the weaves out of this, converted them slightly for our purposes to use tiers instead of levels. So instead of being like levels 1 to 9 or caster level 1 to 20, we're using tiers instead. And what I do like how the D20 system worked is that if you knew a weave, it might be able to be cast at a variety of levels. So you might be able to learn it as a 0th level and cast it all the way up to like level 8 or 9. And that's kind of an interesting idea. I like the idea of them being slightly more powerful or weaker depending on other things or even choosing them. So if you play a lot of D&D, you can cast certain spells at a higher level, or you can burn a higher spell slot to cast them at a lower level, or whatever you want to do. So I kind of wanted that metric here. So some of the spells, as you can see, that they have a variety of tiers. Maybe you can't. That's pretty tiny. Maybe you can see this. So for instance, because it's alphabetical, by talent, Balefire is tier 5. It is the highest tier category, and you have to have affinities in all of the powers, and it happens to be lost, so it's not going to be castable anyway. But it's only level 5. But immediately below that, you have Foretell Weather, which is a form of cloud dancing. So you can learn this as a 0th level weave and cast it at 0, 1st, or 2nd tier. So that extends quite a bit. So within the book that we have, so that's page 165. The casting level, which we have converted from tiers, tells you how far into the future your weather sense goes. So the same thing, you would use the same chart to convert this caster level here and determine how far into the future what you at most could. If you chose to only cast this as a tier 1, the most you can look out is 2 days. So that's kind of, well, in this case it would be 2 days to 2 weeks, since those are the same tier. But that's kind of how the weave system works and how I've shoehorned it into Ironsworn for the purposes of this game. So Kotoma feels this great welling up of fear in his chest, and suddenly his senses expand, and he knows with perfect certainty the Dark One is near. He says in a high-pitched kind of panic, Hersham, there are creatures about. Hersham says, I know, boy, run, and the two begin to flee. But not fast enough. So from here we're going to begin our first combat. Kotoma realizes that if they run, they're just going to get attacked from behind. And he says, Hersham, we must stand and fight. The hunter realizes this is probably true. They certainly can't outrun regular wolves, let alone the wolves of the Dark One, Dark Hounds. And so he hates the idea of it, but he knows that Kotoma is right. And so the two men turn and stop and prepare to fight. So the first thing I'm going to have them do is secure an advantage. So this is going to be a forceful defense. So we're going to roll plus iron. Oh, I'm nervous for the roll, man. We have no additional modifier. Oh wait, we get a modifier for our bond? Yeah, I think we'll take a bond for Hersham being here. Oh no. So we fail to secure an advantage, and we must pay the price. I think the most sensible thing to happen is that they misunderstand where the Dark Hounds are. And so they prepare a defense, and it's from the wrong direction. I think that makes the most narrative sense. So yeah, the thing that makes the most sense is that they set up and they prepared for an assault. So they pivoted themselves, so they would have a frontal defense, and they were just wrong. I think we're going to have Kotoma lose a momentum for that. We're going to have him suffer 1. And let's move to here. So I'm making use of an idea called UDT, Universal Dungeon Terrain, from Professor Dungeon Master on YouTube. If you haven't been following his videos, I'd recommend them highly. They have some really good ideas for speeding up play. And since our game is played with a single player and it's almost entirely theater of the mind, the thing that I think makes more sense is to keep track of range. So that's what I've done. So here's my modified version of UDT for Roll20. The inner circle here represents touch distance, direct melee attack, allies who are fortifying themselves, people who are healing, etc. Each circle, the next circle is close range. So this is melee attack with weapons, maybe not touch attack, but like that 5 to 10 foot range. Then we have the medium range, so that would be things like ranged weapons, melee weapons can't reach here, certain weaves, and then we have long range. So a short bow is not going to reach all the way out to here, but a long bow might, or a siege engine or a trebuchet, or weaves that can operate out in the several hundreds of yards range. So we're going to be using this to kind of keep track. And we don't really have turn counters per se, but we're going to treat movement between these as kind of relevant. So these our main characters, Kotama and Hersham. They believe that their enemies are coming from this direction. So they've set up, and they believe incorrectly they're going to be attacked from here. So they've pitched their defenses. Hersham is mostly a hunter by trade, so he has his bow off, or his bow out and ready, an arrow knocked, not pulled back. It's unlike films, you really can't stand with a bow pulled back for too long, but he's ready to engage. Kotama, he's the son of a noble. He's trained in fencing. He may not be his strongest suit, but he unsheathes his sword and prepares for the fight. But they're caught off guard. Everything is able to move in closer before they get an opportunity to react. So we're about to enter into combat. So we're going to make the enter the fray combat move. Enter the fray, we're going to determine that these are dangerous foes. So 2 progress per harm, inflicting 2 harm each. They're ambushed, so we're going to have them roll plus wits. And let's give that a go. We're going to give a modifier for... Actually, we're not going to use a modifier at all, because we were ambushed, and even the fact that we're with our friend I don't think should matter that much. Alright, on a miss, combat begins with you at a disadvantage. Pay the price, and your foe has initiative. A friend, companion, or ally is put in harm's way. Ooh. That is not what I had in mind. All right. Oh, I just realized I was keeping... Oh, no, these are vows. Progress. So these were going to be dangerous, but I'm treating them on 1 progress track, so we have to mark them as formidable per the rules. So that means we're going to have 1 full check per successful action. So the first thing that we can do is we do not have initiative. Our foe has initiative. So we can't use the strike combat move, so we're going to use clash. And this is for Hersham, basically. So we're going to roll for iron. And it's a miss. Man. On a miss, you are outmatched and must pay the price. Your foe has initiative. I think the most obvious thing to happen here is that Hersham is wounded. He's going to take an injury. So typically you have call these 6 health levels. So we will keep track here. These are formidable foes. So they inflict 3 harm. Whew. Man, that is rough. On a miss, oh, that's strike, sorry. So on a miss, you are outmatched and must pay the price. Your foe has initiative. Okay, so I may have rolled incorrectly. So, in this case, this was clash, meaning you're attempting to fight back. But what we needed to actually do was face danger. I'm probably not going to change the health level change there. I just want to make that roll so I can get used to doing it correctly. Okay. So yeah, I think narratively it still makes sense for Hersham to take the damage, and what we should have rolled is face danger there. So now we're fully in combat. Both sides are aware that they're fighting, and we're going to treat rolls for the pack, and then see where we go. So the enemy still has an advantage. So all the wolves are going to move in, and now we're fighting back. Now it's clash. Now we're fighting together, we're fully aware. I'm going to use the bond that we have, give ourselves a +1. And we scored a weak hit. So we find an opening and inflict 1 harm on our enemy. Which means we make a progress. Oh, that was a strong hit. Sorry. Strong hit, you take the initiative. On a weak hit, you inflict your harm, pay the price, and your foe still has initiative. We're using weapons, so that actually means that we're doing 2 of these per. And we have to pay the price again. A person or community you trusted loses faith in you or acts against you. I think the only thing that makes sense here is for Hersham to flee. I mean, in D&D terms, he's bloodied, and they haven't even gotten to the city. So I think he's going to use his turn to flee, and it's now me against the Dark Friends, or the Dark Hounds. Dang. Kotama has high wits and heart. I don't think he would give up just yet. I think he's gonna stand and do what he can. So I think it's clash again. We're still at iron because we're in direct close combat. We lost our modifier because Hersham's out. But it's a weak hit. Alright. So we do our damage, which is 2. And we pay the price. Oh, that's a move. Sorry. Man. The current situation worsens. How does this get worse? I think we've got a couple of options. More Darkhounds could show up. A Darkhound could peel off after Hersham and get to him. Or Kotama could fall. All right, we're gonna answer this with some straight up old school. Let the dice figure it out. So 1 to 2, more Darkhounds arrive. 3 to 4, a Darkhound peels off after Hersham and gets to him. And 5 to 6, Kotama stumbles and falls. More Darkhounds arrive. How many? 1. Okay. Another Darkhound arrives. Man. That's a bummer. You know, I think narratively that's a setback. I don't think it could be anything else. I still think Kotama stands for at least one more round, right? Because these guys are in here now. I think he stands for at least one more round. It's a miss. Move. It is in fact harmful. All right, so we make the endure harm move. So it's not clear to me whether I think I just take the damage. Is what happens. 1, 2, 3. Damn. But we press on. At this point, I think even Kotama realizes the jig is up. This can't happen. He can't do it. I think he needs to face danger to flee the attack. So yeah, I think we're gonna face danger plus edge and try to get out of here. Oh, more flexibility to bring a favored stat into play. Okay, I wouldn't have used edge then. I think that's fine to re-roll that. So we are gonna face danger with wits. We are gonna think our way out of this particular problem. No modifier. A strong hit, thank God. Alright, so a strong hit, you're successful, and we take momentum. Yeah, hands down, that's ideal. So we're gonna take one momentum, and we're gonna begin to flee. I think the next thing that we can do is see if we can end the fight. End the fight for progress. Weak hit. On a weak hit, the foe is no longer in the fight, killed or out of action, flee or surrender. In this case, I think we flee. But you must also choose one. It's worse than you thought and do harm. You're overcome and endure stress. Your victory is short-lived. You suffer collateral damage. That is clearly going to happen. An objective falls out of reach. Others won't forget. I think that the thing that makes the most sense for this is probably endure stress. I think that makes the most sense. So when you face mental shock or despair, you suffer minus spirit equal to your foe's rank or as appropriate. If your spirit is 0, blah blah blah, does momentum, spirit or heart, whichever is higher. Heart is 2, spirit is 5. Let's endure some stress. Strong hit, shake it off. If your spirit is greater than 0, you suffer -1 momentum in exchange for +1 spirit. Well, I can't take +1 spirit. Instead, I'm going to take that as a +1 momentum. Oh man, that was something. As the two men flee, I think because of the way that was able to work, they're going to actually make it to the city. Let's make a wits roll. Well, actually, we can roll that on an oracle table, right? I think it's more likely that they make it to the city. Yeah, they do. Okay. Then if they have to go back to the cabin. No benefit. Okay. So they make it back into the city ragged. Both are injured. Both Kotama and Hersham are pretty badly injured. So I think they're going to need to hold up for the night before they go and try to find Hersham's contact. So they limp their way into the city. I don't think that they can do that without being seen. But we'll let the dice decide. So weak hit. So I think that they're able to make it into the city noticed, but anonymous. Cloaks pulled over, bloodied bad. One of the guards meets them at the gate and says, are you all right? Kotama pulls down his coat to cover his face. Hersham, who's frankly pissed, says, there are dark hounds about in the hills, the servants of the Dark One. Close the gates. Spread the word, close the gates. The Dark One's own are here. And I think that's what we're going to end session 1 of Dragonsworn. Thanks for playing along with me. Thanks for hanging out. If you have any suggestions about the shoehorning of D20, Wheel of Time, and Ironsworn, I'm interested to hear it. Feel free to give me a contact. And hopefully I will see you again soon for session 2. Thanks, everyone.